Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Hoven, your host of the Difference Makers podcast. This is a place where people come together that are making a difference for those who want to make a difference. And that's you. We're bringing thought leaders together in a sense of fusion where ideas and concepts and personalities are all driven together into one place at one time. And this is no different. In this episode, you're going to see cool things from cool people making a difference.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Difference Makers podcast. My name is Bradford Keaty and I am guest hosting today. I've got with me Dr. James Hoven, someone you probably already recognize from the podcast and other episodes, but we're doing some things a little bit differently today. I'm going to be driving the bus. I've got a couple things I want to talk to Dr. Hoven about, and so I'm going to be asking you some questions instead today, Doc.
Yeah, so cool to be kind of on the other side of the table or the hot seat because you and I have so many great conversations, and when something pops into your brain, you're a thinker, you like to chase it down. Man, I'm excited. Like, we haven't really gone in depth of what this is going to be about. So there's a lot of we're going to do this ad hoc here. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited. A little impromptu taste of your own medicine. See how you like it.
I probably deserve it.
So here's what I was thinking. So what I want to do today for all of you difference makers out there, I heard a phrase said to me in kind of a business context previously, and I thought to myself, this would be a great chance for me to take some time, develop my own opinion on this well-known phrase, but then also kind of challenge it a little bit. I wanted to develop something and try to take a different perspective or a different look at a way that we kind of view the answer to these sorts of questions. But then I also wanted to live on the show give you a chance to develop your own opinion as well, Dr. Hoven, so we can kind of go back and forth, a little bit of clash of ideas, right?
Okay, yeah.
So here's what I heard the other day. I heard this question: how do I develop and add talent or skill to my organization? Right? Talent and skill are things that everyone's looking to add to their organization. Whether, I come from a cooking background, so the first thing I think of is, how do I add more chefs that are more skilled to my kitchen, right? How do I add more people that are better at what the people that are better doing what I need them to do inside my organization, right? That's a question we hear all the time. There's all sorts of organizational development tools out there that are targeted at answering that question, right? But something that I feel like is getting maybe not necessarily overlooked, but where I want to focus our conversation on today is the question: how do I develop commitment to the organization? Right? And it's not to say that one is more important than the other. I think they both are equally important, and they can vary sometimes in certain areas. But I think that second question, how do I develop commitment to my organization? Sometimes individuals that join your organization already have it. Sometimes when you do a recruiting or you find new people to add to your organization, it's already there. But other times you need to develop it. How do we develop that commitment to a business or kind of organization? So that's what I want to go over today with you. Okay. What are your overall, just the first opinions, or on the first glance, what do you have to say to something like that?
So first of all, I don't know. I think that I appreciate how you're looking at this, because you're saying, is one more important than the other? Is it finding top talent that you can develop, or is it finding commitment of the talent you have, is kind of what I'm hearing you say. And I would say that two things can be true at the same time. Mm-hmm. And so if you had an ideal world, you would have talented people who are committed to the vision, mission, goals of whatever it is, whether it's a business or a team or an organization, nonprofit, church, right? It's all the same concept. So as I think about it, when it comes to part A of developing the talent or hiring for talent, that comes in two ways, because in an interview, you can only get so much depending on the position. Like, there are some positions, if you needed an engineer that had to be able to draft this and that, there's probably a set of tools or tests that you could give them to see if they met what you and I talk about when we say a minimal acceptable bottom, right?
Like, there are measurable metrics for how talented someone is in a certain position.
Yes,
there are ways to find that.
And there are other areas that are a lot more soft, like in what you do every day with working with some of the teams of people that are answering the phones and all that. You and I have had many meetings about this, right? Where we're saying, okay, what of this is how many calls can be taken, but versus how many quality calls and how many connections on those calls. So I think there's an art and a science to getting people who are committed, getting people who are talented and bringing them on the team from the interview process. I think if we can find a base level of aptitude, then we say, oh, okay, we can develop aptitude to a certain degree, but then we go by attitude.
Right.
And attitude is something that It's tough to develop attitude. We get to be, what do they say? Leopards have a hard time changing their spots.
Yeah,
they say they can't.
Yeah.
But I'm going to say it's a harder time, or old dogs, new tricks, and all that.
Yeah. There's many an adage about exactly that concept of an attitude, or helping, something that you could describe in that position of being an old dog learning new tricks. And I appreciate that you are kind of separating those two things, because that's what I wanted to do today. I feel like the first thing, we have a lot of resources for that already. Mm-hmm. It's going to be incredibly easy for any of you difference makers, wherever you may be making a difference in your community with whatever organization you're a part of, to find talented people, right? And that's not necessarily where I want to focus. Let's focus instead today on, when you have folks in your organization, how do you develop their commitment? How do you find people that are going to be committed? So as we move forward, I've broken it down into 3 different sections. So the 3 sections that I want to go over today is, first of all, how do you develop commitment to the big picture? The second one is, how do you develop commitment to the day-to-day operations? And the third one is, how do you develop commitment to the values of your organization? Every organization has a big picture. What do you do? We work at Ramos Law. Our job is to make sure that the community understands that legal help is never as far away as it feels. And if you ever need help in the legal field, you can always call Ramos Law and we'll be there for you. That's our big picture. Mm-hmm. We're here to help. Mm-hmm. Our day-to-day operations, obviously, there's different people that work in different divisions. Attorneys have certain things that they need to do. Paralegals have certain things they need to do. Our client services staff has certain things they need to do. But there needs to be a level of commitment to the individual operations. But then finally, we also have a set of values that Dr. Ramos and our executive team have developed for our business that say, this is the way that we do things, right? There's not just a order of operations or a general goal that we need to accomplish, but there's a way that we're going to do all of this. And it's through this lens of value. So those are the 3 areas that I want to talk to you about today. Let's start with the first one, developing commitment to the big picture. Now, of course, this assumes that your business or organization has an idea of what the big picture is, right? And as I was saying, as an example of Ramos Law, our job is to help folks understand legal help is right around the corner. Mm-hmm. How do you, and I know this isn't necessarily on your nameplate, but we all call you the chief glue officer, right? You're sticking people together. You're helping people come together as a team. How are you helping them develop their commitment to kind of the big picture of an organization? It's
such a great question, Bradford, and I think that it applies in all 3 of the levels of commitment that you referred to earlier. Mm-hmm. And to me, if I get to know you as a person, so if I'm talking with you and I know the things that you're into, I know what you love to do outside of work, I know what drives your heart and your mind, then if I can take what we're doing through our big vision or our operations, if I can take either of those and connect them to how you helping us accomplish that helps you in your, what we would call in your key values, right? So we talked about core values, which is the kind of the values that you referred to generally. Mm-hmm. But here at Ramos Law, we have 5 core values. And just for people looking out there, these are not hard, they're not deep, and they shouldn't be deep if you're creating them for your organization. But ours are: we care deeply, we communicate openly, we put others first, we pursue excellence in everything we do, and we have fun doing it. And that's something that we have all established. We built those over time together, came up with them. They bubbled up from the surface. And now that is, as you referred to, that's the lens. And so if, no matter which of the 3 stratas that we're operating out of, if I know how you really catching the big vision of the organization will serve Bradford's desire to be healthy, to do his magic tournaments, to see his mother, I know what's important. And if I can figure out how those things connect with your key values, how our core values meet your key values, now that's how commitment and buy-in comes to place. That's this whole big thing now. Like, you're seeing companies, it's Tom's Shoes, right? That says, hey, for every pair you buy, we'll give a pair to someone who needs shoes. Right. There's this social consciousness. So people that join that team need to have a social consciousness. If they were all the people like, it's all about profit, that's not a good values match. Right. And so therefore they're not going to get commitment when they're seeing, especially if they were bonused or rewarded on more profit. Right. Oh, profit's going right out the window because we're donating shoes. Yeah. So they're not going to link their key values with the company's core values and their big mission. That makes sense. And I think that and this is what I'm hearing. First of all, when we're looking at point 1 of how do we get individuals on our teams or in our organizations to have more or develop more commitment for our big picture, the first part of that is, if they're a part of your organization, they've already got some kind of connection to that big picture. Ideally. Right. If I love
to do X, Y, or Z thing, but I'm not in an organization that does that thing, then there's going to be an automatic disconnect. I love to be in the kitchen. I love cooking. I did it for 10 plus years, right? There's an automatic connection there because the big picture goal of I make food is something I like to do. Mm-hmm. Once you go beyond that initial connection, what would you recommend for anyone building an organization to help folks that already have gotten to that point get a little bit farther? Beyond that connection of, right, because obviously, like, there's this sense of development that you're going to be able to get. There's a sense of accomplishment. There's the key values I have as an individual that match the general values of the company. How do you continue to develop that in somebody over, a course of years?
Great. Another great question. You've thought through this.
A little bit. Yeah,
I like it. So to me, this one is going to now bleed into, it's really hard for me to isolate these things because in any organization, it's a living, breathing organism where just like in our bodies, the physiology of the cells of your heart have to work with the cells of your lungs, with your kidneys, with your, like everything's kind of moving together. So we try to separate them and there is some separation, but a lot of it overlaps. So this one is going to kind of go between number 1 of our overall vision and number 2 of our processes. So imagine this, if we had someone, and I've had to do this with our team here at Ramos Law before, in the processes part, being committed to the processes. And you and I have had hours of conversation about this, right, in different departments.
And that's where I love to live, are those operational processes.
And that is so where you're at. And we can go into that a little bit later too on people's loves, right, and their enjoyment at work and all the things that you and I talk about. But if you are in that middle portion and you're in the process, if you're committed to the process. Now, there are some people that their values drive them. They say, I want to be great. I'm a perfectionist. I'm a list doer. I'm a this, I'm a that. And there are some people that go, you know what? I want the result. I want the relationship. I want the connection. Well, if you don't give really good connecting of the people who they want to just have the relationship and they want to bring value and they're forced to do procedure. If they can't connect how the procedure brings them value, it creates problems, right? It creates then just like in our case, again, I was referring to this a moment ago, I've had to share with team members, like, what you do is vital to this organization. So imagine for those of you at home, whatever organization that you're a part of or that you link to, in our world, if someone gets in a crash and they've been injured, it wasn't their fault, they can't work, let's say, they had to go to the hospital, they've got medical bills piling up, all these things change their lives. For that one person and the ripple effect of their family, it's enormous. But when you go into the law firm, they hear that story for 100 cases or more per person, right? Because they're working on that. So in that case, now at the procedural part, that person could be going, man, I've got all these medical records to ask for, and I've got all these phone calls that I have to make, and I've got all these adjusters I got to bang heads with. It's just so much because they've lost track of what it means to that one family that you are their ambassador. If they can't get those medical records, it's just as important to their case as if the attorney can't get a hold of the adjuster, right? So having that really personal ownership of the impact that your work does at the end, that's the only thing that allows the company's vision to take place. It does not take place without what each person does, and getting them to understand the importance of what they do. I think that's really paramount.
And it sounds like, and to zoom out a little bit more, right? Because I want to try my best to kind of keep into these 3 different areas. I know that, of course, some of the, delineation that I'm making is somewhat arbitrary. It's going to be kind of the nature of doing these sorts of things. But in that first question of how do we develop commitment to the big picture, the first half of it is find people that are already invested, right? Find
Ideally.
people that already love what it is, the big picture that you're doing.
Yes.
But then to continue developing them, get to know them better. And find ways that your business or your organization can connect with them individually.
Yes.
Right. And then as we move into the concept of how do you increase or develop commitment for somebody doing the day-to-day operations, right? Which is, okay, we click on this box first, and then we click on this box, and then we click on this box. In order to get them involved in those operational details, getting to know them is, again, the first step. The thing we learned to how do you develop in the first point is the first step to develop in the second point, which makes me think that the second half of continuing to increase someone's commitment inside their organization is making sure that they're getting fulfillment out of what they're doing. Not just knowing what they're good at, or not just knowing what they want to do, but making sure that they're feeling fulfilled.
Yes. And here's a thing with fulfillment. So if I forget about this, remind me, say, hey, there was a thing about fulfillment.
Okay, I'll make a note right now.
Okay, there's a thing about fulfillment. But going back to step one, you brought up something really important just a moment ago where you said, hey, in the kitchen, it was all about the food. And then if you and I were talking and I would say, but yeah, you're not in food anymore, but you're still having this passion and this and this and this. The question that I would ask behind that first statement of I love the food is, what does loving the food and getting that out, what does that bring to you, right? What are the emotions that flood into you when that process goes exactly right? Because here you are, a guy that loved the kitchen and was steeped in it for your whole life, for 10 years of your life. You came to a different industry, but you showed the same passion. So it wasn't, in this case, the food, because we don't do food.
No, we don't.
But there's something behind that you said to me long ago, and you said, being in here is like being in the kitchen. There's things, this goes here, this goes here, this goes here, and that's what we do. And you knowing that there's a thing and a system for a place, and where that can really make a difference and drive the outcome, that brings you joy. So when you find that thing, no matter what industry you're in, that's where you can navigate that. Whereas if you, for example, if you love sports talk, I was down at the sports station the other day. I had a radio interview or a interview that I had to do, and it's where the sports station is. And I listen to the sports station all the time, right? And so I got to meet all the guys that were, on air and all that kind of stuff. These people love what they do. And so for them, there's a natural connection. Many of them were athletes before. And so there is that natural connection to sports and in that world. But sometimes coming into a different industry, if you can find the thing that brings you joy that you can apply to any industry, it just makes you so much more able to find love and joy and the commitment to that vision, because you're not only creating the outcome of the vision, but you're getting what you need as a human as you get there.
So what it sounds, and to just as additional perspective, I love listening to you and then breaking it down in my own words. And I think that's part of the reason why I love doing this with you, is this back and forth. But what I'm hearing is, in that fulfillment, identifying what it is that's bringing you joy, not necessarily in the action of the task that you're completing, but what the completion of that task or the operation of that task is bringing you for your own personal, like for yourself, is going to become what can help you develop that commitment to the business. Because a business that and I keep saying business, it's an organization, right? It can be any organization. An organization that cares about how you are experiencing that task is a business that's going to be able to help you develop that commitment. And that commitment doesn't, obviously the organization is somewhat in charge of that level of mindfulness and understanding, hey, there's people that are a part of this organization that you want to continue to be part of the organization. But ultimately, commitment is something that is generated from inside the individual. I become committed to an organization. An organization doesn't commit me to itself.
Correct.
Right? It comes from me, which means that the mindfulness of the organization of knowing what makes me feel like that is a relevant detail. And when you look at all of that through the lens of something like a set of core values, in my mind, it clarifies that business's ability to identify what those things are. The third thing that I want to talk about, or the kind of the next thing in line, is how we develop commitment to a company's values, right? We've already talked a little bit about kind of the big picture of the business. How you got to find people that already know, hey, I love being in this arena.
Or can learn to love it.
Right, or can learn to love it. And you develop them by identifying what are the things they care about in their life that we also care about in our business goals, right, or our organizational goals. And then the second thing was, how do we make sure that their day-to-day is fulfilling their commitment and increasing and developing their commitment? And the first part of that was, we need to make sure that we're matching what people want to do with the tasks that we have available. And the second half is the tasks that they're doing, how is that bringing them joy?
Can I add one layer onto that?
Yeah.
This was what I was going to ask you to remind me if I forgot. If someone is going to be excellent at what they do operationally, like literally the day-to-day, dot the I's, cross the T's, in the trenches work, they have to have good training. And it's an ongoing training, because if you really want to be exceptional, especially if you're not in your ultimate strength zone. We talked a few minutes ago about the people that are, the detail workers, get all that done, and the people that are more the high level people. Well, sometimes you have to do detail work if you're a high level person, right? Or not a high level, like if you are about relationships and all that kind of thing. If your role requires a lot of detail work, and that's especially if that's not your giftedness, you'd better have a training system that allows you to be not only just barely proficient, but to excel. And so if you want people in that mid-level that we're talking about, level 2 right now, if you want them to excel, help them understand what they're doing and give them repeated training, so that just touch points to keep them on the latest and greatest, because that way it'll be smooth. And when there's lack of friction in what we do every day, that creates less conflict, that creates more joy, more smoothness. So I would say training is the other part that you were talking about of level 2 of commitment.
And I think that this is a really great example of the crossover, where I don't think it would be fair to say the concept of developing commitment versus developing talent, which really maybe versus is not what we should be saying there. But when we're, the conversation we're having is that versus conversation, right? Is it, okay, should we be developing commitment or should we be developing skill? The training, in my opinion, is on the skill side of things.
Fair
you
point.
need skilled trainers and skillfully developed training material that can be executed well to give those individuals you're trying to increase their commitment in the day-to-day operations. You need to make sure that the people that are executing and developing that training material are very, very skilled. And I think it's interesting that you're bringing that up now, because I think that does intersect perfectly with this second point, and where I don't necessarily think that you should be choosing one over the other.
Yeah.
You kind of need to be able to look at them equally.
And think about this. This was a story that literally just happened last week, and you were part of this. So I get a call. We have someone in one of our companies, right? Dr. Ramos owns many companies, and one of our companies who is helping us out at Ramos Law. And so she's going through a process, and she's coming into into a division within our business, and she literally texts me and said, "Hey, do you have a minute?" I think it's Thursday night, like 8:00. And she goes, "Do you have a minute?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I call her up and I'm like, "Hey, what's going on?" And she says, "You know what? I'm so frustrated. All I want to do is help, but all I feel like I'm doing is banging my head against the wall, and I'm creating more work for my new teammates. And so I don't think this is for me." Right? And so I asked her a really important question. I said, "Hey, let me ask you something. If you hate the work, if you just know, if you were putting this work that you're doing against waitressing, against, calling people from home as a home receptionist, I don't know. But if you hate the work, then there's no more to talk about. You should not be doing this." On the other side, if you don't feel that you've had the training to make you proficient and effective at the work, then we need to find another way, because this person is only coming literally 1.5 days a week. So she can't get the reps that she needs to learn it fast, right? So there has to be a whole different training mindset, as you well know, to get this person to where they feel comfortable. And after thinking about it, she goes, "No, I think I could really do a good job, and I think it would be perfect role for me, but I'm just frustrated." And so hearing that and just living that last week, and so you were the first person I called, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "Hey, you and I have to figure out what we're going to do," because her answer is, "I want to try this. We just need to figure out a way." So that kind of leads me down that path of saying, if you want commitment to the vision, make sure that you give them the opportunity so that they can do their jobs effectively and efficiently.
Right. Well, and as we transition kind of into this third section, talking about the overall values of a company, we're assuming that these values and the way that we, operate, and the lens through which we view solutions and problems at the same time, we're assuming those have already been well developed, or that are being developed well on their own, right? The executive team, the ownership, the pillars of a business have already set these values up for us so that we can use them in our day-to-day operation, right? And so that we can view these sorts of problems and solutions through them. And when we're looking at something that you were talking about that happened last week, starting with the training material is going to help that person get the knowledge that they need, but then continuing to develop them to allow them to continue to be committed to the business, we're going to have to be able to execute that training material through that lens.
Absolutely.
Right. So the 5 core values we already talked about, right? Caring deeply, communicating openly, pursuing excellence, putting others first, and having fun. There is you can be good at doing all of that stuff without being committed to living that out. And one of the next question that I want to pose to you is, first of all, is there a tangible difference between those two things? This is one of the ones that I was stuck on while I was getting ready for this today with you. I couldn't tell the difference, or maybe I wasn't able to develop or find the words for the difference that I'm thinking about between somebody being able to effectively act those things out, but not truly being committed to them. Do you believe that there is a difference there? And if so, what does that look like? If somebody who is doing those actions, right? They're pursuing excellence, right? They're putting others first. Is it possible to do those things without believing in them or being committed to them?
I would say yes in the short term. So that's what I'll say. But let me say something before that. You and I are sitting here, right? We don't have the core values listed on our walls anywhere, but both of us, just at the drop of a hat, listed the 5 core values.
Yeah.
We push that in this organization. You push that with your teams. I push that with mine, that we expect them to memorize them and to be able to drop them just like what we did. Too many companies, they never become real. Too many organizations, they never become real because they're made from the leadership, but they're not imbued or imbibed into the
really
populace of the group. And so if I asked someone to live our core values and I asked them what they are and they can't name them like what you and I did, there's no way for them to live them.
It's a really
right?
good point.
They're going to live them as whatever their natural personality is, but it will not be an intentional, like, I'm going on to this call, I need to make sure that I'm caring deeply. When you say them enough in your mind, you start expressing them. So I think if someone were, we'll call it faking it for lack of a better term, of saying care deeply. Okay, yeah, I could give a crap about people.
Right.
I like this and I have to deal with people. I could say, hi, Mrs. Jones. Yes. But eventually that's going to wear me down and there's going to be a dissonance between me and my own key values or my own core values. And it's going to drive me out of that department or out of that company. So universal physics will take its course if you can't really get down with the core values. That's my opinion.
So then maybe a better way to say this is that when we're attempting to develop commitment to a organization's core values, repetition is in fact key. If
so
this
good.
is just something that, everybody needs to be a part of and say and do, I don't need a full wholesale buy-in. I don't need you to be showing up with that on your shirt every day, but I do want to see some actionable and noticeable attempts at living that out while we're on our organizational environment.
I agree.
And the more that you see that, the more it's just going to become part of your staff or your organization's existence.
Yes.
And then before you know it, it bleeds out onto the streets. It bleeds out at home. And it just starts becoming part of the impact that your organization wants to make wherever it is that you're making an impact.
That is so
we
good.
call this the Difference Makers podcasts. This is probably the biggest place that you can make a difference. If you know what your organization's values are and you know what you want the people that are part of that organization to be exuding when they are there or elsewhere, that should be priority 1. I may have gotten these things flipped around. I got this listed as number 3 on here. Maybe this should be number 1.
That's so good. And here's a living example. I love Texas RoadHouse. Love me some RoadHouse, right?
Yeah, you do.
So I'll go there and it's the same experience every time for me, right? Whether you, and another example of this is Chick-fil-A. And so obviously, I'm not at the health food store all the time based on those 2 examples. But when I see people at Texas RoadHouse, many of them, they rotate their t-shirts, right? But they're usually in pretty much of the same gear. And one of their t-shirts says, I love my job.
Yeah.
Well, imagine if you're in there and you're hooping and hollering, they got the music going and you've got all these people and they're trained. These are our core values. And they see, I love my job on the backs of all of their coworkers. And then they're having conversations. They're creating the environment of success, of living the culture. That's what we need to do in all of our organizations. Whatever these values are, we need to make sure that they're alive and make sure that they're pulsing. They are the heartbeat of the organization. And if we can really get there, and the bigger the organization gets, obviously, the harder that becomes because everyone's got lots of stuff going on in their lives. Yeah. But this is what I tell our team. If you can really own our core values and own them inside these 4 walls, as you said, it spills out or it bleeds out. I'm telling you, what it does for your life outside these 4 walls is amazing too. Now, every organization has their own core values and who are we to say what those should be? If one of your core values is having a profit of 60% or more, maybe that doesn't really transfer out there unless you say, hey, I want to have my personal bills be at 40% of my income. So maybe it can translate. I don't know. But in our effort, we made an effort for these core values to be able to be transferred to make all of our team's lives better when they go home, just like they make our business better inside.
And I think it's interesting that a lot of times I think that people that are new to business I'm going to say businesses in this situation because folks that come into Ramos Law or that are new to our business, it can be a little bit jarring to experience such a well-developed culture when you're just doing, the stuff that you know how to do.
Yes.
Right? I would know that I would be shocked if I walked into a restaurant that had a culture similar to the way that we operate this firm.
Yes.
When you put that much time and energy into developing that culture, it can be difficult for some people to adjust to. I am not, and I'm speaking now from the perspective of an owner of a business like this, I am not expecting you to change your lifestyle. I am just expecting you to adopt the company's values.
1,000%.
When you see those folks at Texas RoadHouse wearing those shirts that say, I love my job, I don't necessarily need you to change your lifestyle everywhere to make sure that you love your job. I just need to make sure that when you're wearing that t-shirt, it looks like you should be.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because the folks that don't look like they love their job, they probably don't work at Texas RoadHouse very long.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know that for a fact. I can't demonstrably point to anything that would prove me correct at this. But that's kind of, I don't want anyone to feel like they need to change their lifestyle to be a part of my organization. But I want you to recognize that while we're working and doing what we do in this organization, this is the way that we do things.
And think about this. That is such a great point. Think about this. If you really buy into the 3 levels that you've shared today, so at the top level of what our purpose is as a business, what are we trying to change? How do we dent the universe, so to speak? And then our processes on how we do that. And then essentially, if you look at it, then it would be our people, right? Our culture, our people. So we could use those 3 Ps if you wanted to. If we are at work more than we're outside of work, many of us, we're dealing with these same people, these same issues as team members. If we're happy at work, how can it not bleed out into your home? If you leave the day tired but fulfilled, right? Or you leave with more positive energy because of the relationships you had and the difference that you made, there's no way it can't make your life suck. There's no way it'll make your life suck. There's no way it can't make your life better.
Yeah, I think that, is if you're going to work and then coming back from work and it's neutral, then we're in a pretty good spot.
We're in a pretty good spot.
Just be leveled off.
Yes.
Now imagine as somebody who's an owner of an organization or somebody who's driving the difference making that we want to encourage all of you to do. Imagine if you could have people come home even just 0.1% better, right?
Yeah.
Instead of instead of 0, just 0.1%. Okay, now let's get to 1%. What if it's 5% now? And all of a sudden you start to aim higher and higher and higher. And when you identify ways to develop these kinds of commitment to your business, I think it's just going to make it easier and easier to aim higher and higher on that scale.
I'd like to ask you one question as we kind of wrap this up.
Yeah.
So we've talked about all these things, and hopefully there's been some gold for all of you watching or listening that you can use in your organizations and share with someone else. But where do you feel, because where you sit in this company, you have a lot of responsibility. At the same time, you watch other people have different responsibilities, more or less, all this other stuff. What responsibility is it of leadership to continue to look to innovate and change and experiment and try to make that connection between the business's purpose and profit and the people that are within it and the process? All of this stuff has to be getting together. And the reason I ask you is, of course, we brought in the working genius model in order to help us find how we can all work together. Where is our working genius? So that if a paralegal has one working genius and another paralegal has another, they still have to get the same work done, but how do they enjoy that as much as possible? And how do they support each other? And that's just an example of what we've done. We have a culture officer. All he does is try to make this place a great environment to work.
Yeah.
So now from your perspective, what role does leadership play in driving, whether it's a team, a church, a nonprofit, to make sure that its people get what they need as opposed to the person having to be motivated and committed and a self-starter? Where does that mix come into play?
Right. So to distill the question even further, what responsibility does leadership in your organization have to continue developing that commitment?
Yes.
I think that if these are the 2 things that we're trying to kind of compare, concept of developing skill versus developing commitment, I think that it should be about half of the leadership's responsibilities of what they're focusing on, while the other half is developing that skill and developing those talents, right? What role do they have? Well, it needs to be basically half of what you're doing as a leader. I think that if you can't set the example of what it should look like to continue developing that commitment, then you're never going to be able to help anyone downstream develop that commitment.
Do as I do, not as I say.
Well, and that's I think the thing you're working against, right? Is you don't want your actions and your words to be mismatched.
Correct.
You should be, this is what I'm saying that we do here. This is what I'm saying the level of commitment is going to reap the rewards for you. This is what I'm saying the level of skill development is going to help you be successful. And then doing that and showing not only is these are the results of what I've put into this, but these are the same results that you can get when you put something into this. And making sure that those same aspirational comments are backed up by a realization of those things that you're talking about, right? Hey, here's an example of you're going to feel better when you get home from work today when we work on these 3 things and your commitment level comes up to here. Hey, here are some things that you're going to just be able to do better once you develop this skill. And then giving people the tools and the resources to develop that skill and become more committed, right? Again, ultimately it's up to the individual. As a leader, I can do whatever, until I'm blue in the face. Yep. But there is a certain amount of responsibility that falls on the individual, but that responsibility is much smaller than the responsibility that the leader has to lead by example and to split your time between developing skill and developing commitment for everyone in the organization.
Man, I could keep going down this rabbit hole forever.
I know, right?
There's so much good stuff.
Yeah,
so much good stuff.
So I want to wrap up because I know we're running right up to the line here. The red light's running. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to sum up our 3 points real quick, but then I want you to give everybody what's something that someone, in fact, let's just start here. What can anyone who is a leader in their organization take away today? If you have just 1, maybe 2 sentences. Okay. What are you telling the organization's leadership to take away from our conversation today?
2 sentences. 1, make a deep connection with as many of your team leaders as you can. And if it can't be all the team leaders, with all the key leaders. Number 1. Number 2, make sure you have clear and clearly communicated core values and what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. Excellent connection with leadership and excellent communication of values and goals. Great takeaways from these 2. I think that this sort of conversation and style, I enjoy this so much. I got to find another one that we can do like this.
Would you? I would love it because, normally I'm on the other side where I get to ask the questions and I'm learning. And this, I have learned so much from your perspective and this conversation is beautiful. So I would like to do this again for sure.
Well, and I have my style for learning is a little bit adversarial and I try to challenge things to learn stuff. And so when I heard that phrase, the most important thing you can do for a business is develop skill and talent. I said, wait a minute. What if skill and talent and commitment are separate? And what if commitment is more important? And what I came out realizing is that I think that they're equally important. But that's exactly the kind of challenging comments that I like to make and to develop my own opinion. And who better than to kind of run them up against than yourself? I love doing stuff like this.
This was great, man. Thank you so much for taking the reins and doing this. This was fantastic.
Absolutely.
I loved it. My day's better now.
Oh, well, that's great. So is mine. This is awesome. And I love to sit and talk. So,
yes, you do.
Doing quite a bit of talking. Well, I want to thank all of you difference makers out there for joining us for yet another episode of the Difference Makers podcast. I don't know where you're listening to this or where you're viewing it, but if you're checking us out on social media, please be sure to give us a like and a follow. Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media sites you may have found us on. If you're using a podcast app to listen to this audio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, be sure to take a minute, give us a 5-star rating, and leave a comment as well. I love to interact in those comment section of those podcasts, or if there's any way that you can review them. We love to look at those sorts of things. And then if there's anywhere else that you want to interact with us, we'd be happy to hear from you. We also would love to get some suggestions. If you've got an idea or a subject matter or a piece of material that you want to go over with us or that you want us to go over here, we would love to know what that is. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and we'll see you next time on the Difference Makers podcast.